has a conversation with an individual where approximately 12 shots are fired, with at least 6 striking the victim, causing his demise. Needless to say, with the potential organized crime angle to this story, it gets the utmost importance to the NYPD and the entire Detective Bureau. At the scene last night were members of Staten Island Homicide, 122 Squad, members of the Criminal Enterprise Division, as well as our federal counterparts with the FBI. Remains a very active homicide investigation at this point. I think it's a little preliminary to be making judgments on motive, but certainly Mr. Cali's prior dealings, he has been arrested prior by the feds, are a focal point at this point of the investigation, but nothing is being ruled out. I'll take some questions on this point. Miles?
This is different in that in the 80s and 90s, you didn't have the police technology that you have now. There was a report of a blue pickup truck that was seen leaving the location. You now have license plate reader technology and that kind of stuff. Can you talk about that part of the investigation as it relates to getaway car and also that advance as well?
Sure. Well, not only in this investigation, but in any investigation, we have the luxury. We're in a very good place from an investigative point of view in 2019 compared to just a few years ago. I've publicly praised the work Jesse Tisch has done many times. License plate readers, the work our lab does, the video camera canvases, the facial recognition technology, all of this builds a stronger case. All of this leads to where we are today in New York City. We are out there as we speak, as you know. We have executed a warrant at that residence. We have obtained video surveillance from that scene. We're piecing together witness canvases, extended video canvases. There is reports of a car pulling away. That is accurate. That's not to make, again, it's a little preliminary to say that car is definitively tied to anything, or that that's the only car, or that there weren't additional people on foot. So this is a very early stage of this investigation, and we have a lot of work to do.
Could you talk a little bit about especially where it was done, outside his home, who was home, if his family was home, and also given like the previous mob boss crime family hits, usually done away from their home, how this is different than some of the historical other hits?
So what I will say is Mr. Cali was home at his residence. Again, it was shortly after 9 p.m. Our understanding is that he was home with his members of his family. I won't go into individual members. He exits his house. There's a conversation, and it's a little preliminary, and there is video accounts of what took place. I won't get too deep into it. But whether it was an altercation or a conversation, that remains to be seen. But he has a conversation with an individual in front of that residence, and that individual at some point in time, it's only about a minute into it, pulls out a firearm and shots are fired.
Do you know if it was a man or a woman in the car was seen?
It appears to be a man, and this is very preliminary, approximately 25 to 40 years of age.
Did something prompt him to exit his house, a phone call?
That's all part of the investigation, and it's a little preliminary to have definitive answers for you at this time. He walks out of his house. What prompted him is part of what we're trying to discern now. Whether he had prior knowledge that somebody would be out there. Did he expect somebody to be out there? We know that there was a vehicle accident in front of the residence. We believe that the victim's car was struck, and that's part of the investigation as we move forward. Rocco?
What was the vehicle accident?
I'm sorry, Rocco first, and then...
What was the accident, and are you suggesting it was an accident staged to get him out of the house?
It appears, with what we know at this point in time, that was part of, quite possible that was part of a plan.
That brings him outside as opposed to someone going in there?
Not definitive at this point, but he certainly is involved, his car is involved in an accident with the individual that winds up shooting him. So that's, his car is parked. That's not to say that he didn't know this person beforehand or not. So don't read too far into that. It's a little preliminary.
Chief, is that the car that was loaded onto a police tow today? Is that his car or possibly a suspect's car? And is the truck in question blue as first indicated or possibly silver?
To be determined, Rocco. You know, at night, video, witness statements, which we're still trying to narrow down. We do have a pickup truck that flees the scene, and we're very interested with that pickup truck, and we'll be putting out some photos of that as soon as we get good information to put out.
With damage, that pickup truck?
We know that there will be damage. How much visible? We have the victim's car, which sustained damage. We have a pickup truck that backed up into it. You can see on video that car belonging to the victim rocks significantly, so it took some force to do that. Whether there's visible damage to the car that pulled away remains to be seen, but it's quite possible. Although there is it's a pickup truck, so there's a tow hitch. There may not be a lot of damage.
You
Tony?
talked about Mr. Cali's connections to organized crime that have been reported in court and out of court. Are you looking into or liaising with any law enforcement people overseas in terms of any possible connections that he may have had that may throw light on this subject?
What was the last part? Overseas, and then what?
Overseas that may throw a light, some light into what happened.
Sure. So I was a little broad in the opening there. It's been widely reported, as I said, his connections. But this is preliminary, and I think it would be a little erring on our part to make any judgments. Certainly, we're exploring what his prior life or current life has connections to the incident last night. It also could have nothing to do with it. So we are at a very preliminary stage. We are ruling nothing out at this point. We are working very closely with our federal counterparts that we work with every day, quite frankly, as well as our criminal enterprise division and our local homicide squads. Just a couple more.
You mentioned
Hold on, I'll get back to you.
There were reports that he was also run over. Is that something that you think?
I believe that to be inaccurate at this time. What I believe happened was Mr. Cali was struck several times by gunfire. In trying to elude additional gunfire, fled to the rear area of his private vehicle, and somebody probably thought he was run over, but it was more that he was trying to get underneath the truck to elude gunfire.
Well, two questions. What kind of car does he have, and are his family and associates cooperating with the investigation?
Yeah, his private vehicle you're referring to? I believe that was a Cadillac SUV, but I will firm that up, that it was parked out in front of his residence that was struck by the pickup truck.
And is his family and his associates, whatever they may be, cooperating with the investigation?
No comment on that.
Chief, broadly speaking, when someone gets out in organized crime, there's always a concern about what that might mean.
Yep.
Chief Got, who's released about 6 months ago, I'm sure he's on the radar. Has he been spoken to yet?
So what I will say is there has been and we were speaking about this earlier, there's been several incidents, whether you want to go back 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, that being one of them. We had an arrest just yesterday in New York City from a 6-1 precinct, earlier homicide. We had the case in the Bronx earlier this year in the 44th precinct, the shooting at the McDonald's. There's been a number of, not a lot, but a couple incidents. I would categorize it as more than we generally have seen in the last couple of years, and all of this will be part of the investigation going forward. What, if any, of these incidents are there connections or not? And it would be too preliminary to say that they are. In the back?
Given the potential organized crime element, are you concerned about retaliation or even a greater mob war restarting?
Yeah, I would just like to emphasize that, when you look at the NYPD as a whole, this is what we do every day. We analyze any incident, whether it has a nexus to domestic violence, to drugs, potentially organized crime. Stopping future violence is what we do day in and day out with the deployment of resources, with Chief Monahan, with all the resources that he has under him. I'm very confident that we can, if there are chances for future violence between our partners, us, we will make sure that there is, kept to a minimum, if you will.
In terms of the person who was doing the shooting, you described him as a male, 25 to 30. Anything more indicating identity, race, ethnic status?
We'll have more to come shortly. Let's just get a little, we're about probably 14, 15 hours into this as we expand the canvas.
Okay, one more and then we'll move on.
Chief, of ballistics recovered, shell casings, 12 shots fired, there must have been some sort of kick out.
Yeah, we have, I believe, 12 shell casings recovered at the scene, and I believe it is from a 9mm handgun. Last one.
Sorry, Chief. With the video you did recover, does it show the actual shooting, and does it show, is it clear enough to identify the shooter himself from the video?
I won't get into what we can identify or what we can't. You see an altercation where shots are fired, what appears to be shots, muzzle flash coming from one individual to the other. Captures the shooting.
All right, let's move on to any other topics you may have. Something else. All right, Marv's first one up.
Can you just the reaction from the department on the stop and frisk report?
Sure. So clearly the court ruled against us in terms of the squibs. Right? Is that what you're talking about, Miles?
ACLU report on.
Oh, the ACLU. So let me back up then. Yeah, let me back up. So I haven't read the report completely. We've seen the summary. The stop and frisk, as you all know, we've been dealing with this now since 2014 when we began working with the monitor to roll out the remedial measures that they put into place. And so that's all still ongoing. Stop and frisk is, I would remind everyone, and just for clarification, because folks, when they talk about stop and frisk, or as we tend to, we prefer to refer to it as investigative encounters, it really is a tool that we have that was provided by the Supreme Court back in 1968 under that case Terry versus Ohio. And so that tool is still available to our officers. We expect our officers to use stop and frisk. And so that's just one point I wanted to make. But the second thing I would make is when we talk about the report and some of what they summarize in there, is that, and you know this already, stop and frisk, it peaked in 2011 at just about 684,000 stops. Last year we ended with under 10,000, just over 10,000 stops. And so when you think about that, I mean, it's just more, 94, 95% decrease is pretty significant. The report is, I think, and some of the issues it raises about the challenges that we face, in their view, with respect to the numbers, again, they're relatively low, and we're doing a great job. The other thing I would add with respect to how our officers use stop and frisk, we have a number of mechanisms in place, and this is above and in addition to the remedial measures that the court has required, but we also monitor the officers' activity. We monitor the way that they, when they use stop and frisk, their immediate supervisors have to review those stops. On a monthly basis now through our Risk Management Bureau, we pay a lot of attention to meeting with borough commanders on a regular basis to remind them of the importance of keeping track of, looking at body-worn camera video and scrutinizing that video, particularly in cases of stops. There is also a pilot that's being conducted that I think you're aware of, that the federal monitor is conducting to look further at stop and frisk as well, and so to get a sense of what those stops look like and whether or not those stops are being reported, because that seems to be the gist of and the focal point of the report. That is that there is underreporting of stops. We monitor and have determined that there are some underreporting. That's not a surprise necessarily, but I wouldn't ever classify it as being anything close to systemic, based on our regular reviews.
Other questions?
Is there any update to the body found in Queens on Tuesday?
Yep. So earlier this week, members of the Detective Bureau were at a location within the confines of the 102nd Precinct. The genesis of them getting there was essentially a woman coming forward to us and reporting that a little over 40 years ago, she recalls now, that a little over 40 years ago, she was present at this house and gave us information regarding the presence of a body that was buried within plastic bags in the backyard. Members of the 102 squad, Queens South Homicide, responded with a cadaver dog, which positively hit on the area. The ensuing search disclosed that exactly where she recalled that the remains would be. We, in fact, did remain what we believe to be human remains. Very active, very preliminary regard to this case. The murder allegedly took place at a location possibly connected to a barbershop in Queens that we have not yet been able to locate, but this investigation remains very active. This has not been ruled a homicide as of yet. We did have a OCME anthropologist on the scene. What we do know is that we have a woman reporting that a homicide took place. The details are not all filled in, as you can imagine, over 40 years ago. The occupants of the current house are not connected to who was there at that time. But we do have partial remains, bones, if you will, and we believe they are human remains.
Did she provide any other context or tips or information? Like, was she a witness to the homicide, or was it just, I know there's a body here?
She did provide some other information, and that remains part of the investigation that's moving forward. We have a lot of work to do on this case, as you can imagine. We have not been able to locate an individual as of yet that reported missing, whether it's male or female. There is a lot of work to do in this case at this point.
Did she explain, did something jog her memory? I mean, 40 years later, it's been a long time. Did she kind of give the background on why in 2019, or was it a repressed memory?
It was more of the repressed memory as it was relayed.
In terms of the remains, the bones that you do have,
Yep.
Did the anthropologist say whether they were able to say whether they're female, give an approximate age of the remains?
We're not there yet, Tony, and we do not have a complete skeleton. But we do believe we have human remains, and in all likelihood, there's a strong possibility that this will turn into a homicide declaration. In the back?
What is the process that you go through in a case like this that happened possibly 4 decades ago, talking about anthropologists? What do you go through?
Well, there's a multitude of tracks that will all converge. We have the OCME playing a significant role in a case like this. The anthropologist, as I said, on the scene, that is declaring to us, yes, these are in fact human remains. We have a number of jobs that takes place in New York City where it'll turn out to be a pet buried in the backyard. The OCME now will jump in and determine, can we determine from what we have, and this is challenging at times, whether the bones that we now know are human, what caused death? Is there impacts from an axe, things of that nature? Are there gunshots? So there's a lot of work on the forensic side. I can tell you significantly on the detective side, we've already interviewed a number of people. Detectives have already flown out of state on this case. There's a lot of work going on, but this will be a challenging case to make, as you can imagine, 40 some odd years. Rocco?
Glasses, a small child from Midtown South,
Yep.
Pennsylvania Hotel.
Yep.
And a woman possibly being, or probably being, I guess, on Staten Island.
Yeah.
Can you update us on those? Are they going to be arrested in both cases right away, or is it going to be DA's call?
Sure. So I'll start with that terrible incident from the hotel. I believe that was in December. I think that was a fairly newsworthy case when 2 women in the hotel in Manhattan with the baby in the stroller and that tragedy. I do expect an arrest to be made in that case. When that case occurred, we had a situation where 2 individuals took a bus to Manhattan from, I believe, Delaware. At some point during their stay at that hotel, we discovered that the baby had passed away in that tragedy. There were some narcotics recovered at the time, heroin, as I can recall, and a significant amount. With this declaration of the homicide, I would expect there will be charges filed, but there's some work to do here, Rocco. What those charges will be, we do have some work to do working together with the Manhattan DA's office to determine. Now,